and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Alexey, and today I have a special guest, Mike Plotnikoff. Mike Plotnikoff is a producer and mixer who has been working with such great rock and metal bands as Aerosmith, Van Halen, Papa Roach, 3 Days Grace, and many more. In our today's interview with Mike Plotnikoff, we're going to be talking about his work on the latest album of Age of Paradise, which is called Prophecy. It's a huge honor to have you on my YouTube channel today, Mr. Plotnikoff. And let's start our interview. How you became a sound engineer?
I started at a studio in Vancouver called Little Mountain Sound. I don't know if you know what that studio is. So I started there and then started working with Bruce Fairbairn mostly and Bob Rock. So right from the beginning, I got to learn from the best. And then there was just a lot of good producers, engineers, and mixers that came through that studio. I started out as an assistant engineer and did that for about 4 years, but got to work with, Mutt Lange and Bob Clearmountain, Chris and Tom Lord-Alge, these big engineers and producers, Mike Fraser, Randy Staub, and then I became Bruce Fairbairn's engineer on Aerosmith Get a Grip, and then was his engineer for 10 years till he passed away, and that's basically how I started. Yeah, started from the ground up. Started as answering phones in the studio. Basically, yeah. How
you got into recording and mixing rock and metal music?
Well, rock was what I grew up listening to, so it was natural for me. And then obviously working at Little Mountain with Bob Rock and Bruce Fairbairn there, that all they were doing was rock music. So I just fit into that category without really trying. And, it's the music I grew up listening to. And then working with Bruce, he was doing all the Aerosmith and Bon Jovi, AC/DC, Cranberries, INXS, all those records that I got to work on with him. And that's basically how I got into it.
How you started working with Age of Paradise?
They reached out to me. I think they were recording with a friend of theirs and they needed a mix on 3 songs. And so I tried out mix and they liked the mix, and then we just got along really well. And then I just started working with them ever since.
How were drums recorded for Prophecy album by Age of Paradise?
Well, they were recorded in our studio in West Valley Studios, which is owned by Howard Benson. Well, Howard owns the studio, but Howard and I share the studio. It's basically both of our studio, even though he typically owns it. But yeah, we tracked the drums in there and just my regular drum setup. I don't know. Do you want me to go through how the drums are recorded? Well, I'm pretty simple actually on my drums. So on the toms, I like to use the KSM 32s, which are Cher KSM 32s. That's what I use on there. On the kick drum, I just use a 421 and a D12. On the kick drum, snare drum 57 top and bottom. On the hi-hat, I use an SM7. And then for my cymbal mics, I use the Telefunkens. And then for my overheads, like kind of overhead room mic, because the cymbals I mic pretty close. And then I'll have a AKG C24, vintage C24 above. And then for my room mics, I use Sheps for the stereo rooms. And then for the mono room, I use a Royer microphone. And then the room mics are compressed with LA3As. The Royer is compressed with 1176. The cymbal mics are compressed with the Avalon BST7, I think that's what it is. And then that's pretty much it. It's pretty basic. Oh, and then the kick and snare, I'm using the Neve compressors, which are they're in the console. And geez, I don't have the exact number. So I have a little compression on the kick and snare, but not much. It's more for color I use. I'm not really hitting them that hard.
What do you use for parallel drums compression?
For parallel drum compression, usually it's just a plug-in. So I'll use the the UAD, I can't think of the name. The curve bender. Yeah, the curve bender on the parallel compression for the drums, for the room.
How are you getting rid of the bleed in the drums?
In the snare, well, for the kick drum, I build a tent over with blankets, packing blankets. So it's pretty dead. And then the snare drum, I have a thing that I use like foam, and I create a little dome. I try to do it under the hi-hat. So it's pretty good, but I like a little bit of leakage. So my leakage is actually really good and toms are what it is. Like I'll ride the toms in and out because you just can't help. Toms is hard to get rid of the leakage, and then obviously a sample in there too. But I use the drum samples from the kit. So it sounds, after every take that we get, I'll sample that drum kit. So those are the samples I add in. So it's not like, I'm putting a foreign kick or a foreign snare or foreign toms in with the sample.
How was Bass Tone created for Prophecy album by Age of Paradise?
Okay, the bass, I use the same bass on every record I do. So basically there's 5 tracks of bass. So one is I have a vintage SVT Ampeg, which I run through an 8x10 cabinet. And that's my amp sound. And I will use a dark glass on it for a little bit of gain. Then I record a DI track, just basic DI, nothing on it, no compression, nothing. Then I run a distortion track, which I use mainly the silver rack mount Sans amp, which I really like, the silver one, for the distortion. And then I run a sub amp, which actually is a SVT4 Pro, and I bi-amp the lows and run it through SVT 4x12 sub Pro cabinet, and I mic the sub port at the back of the cabinet with a D112. And then I'll run another plug-in for the bass as well, for a really clean tone. And I'll use, it varies differently, and I don't remember. I probably used the UAD SVT amp on that.
How do you usually control your low end in your mixes?
I don't know. It's like, that's a hard one because it's all different. I use a lot of roll off. If it doesn't need the low end, I'll roll off everything. And, on the kick and bass, I'll use a little bit of ducking. I'll key the bass with the kick drum, take it down about 3 dB every time the kick hits. That seems to help. Pretty simple. I try not to do too much of it. If the balance is right and the sounds are good, you shouldn't have to do too much of it.
How your guitars recorded for Prophecy album by Age of Paradise?
So guitars is the same. I've been recording guitars the same way for the last 35 years, so or how many years is it? 10 or 25, 26, 27 years. I really only use a 57 and a 421 and a KSM 28 or a KSM 32, and that's my mic. So each speaker has a different mic on it, and then depends. So for the cut, I like the 57. That's the one I use most. I'll add in the 421 for a little color, and then for a little body, the KSM 32. But it's the same mic setup I've always used. Nothing crazy. No compression, no EQ. Just get the right sound out of the amp and the cabs and find the right guitar.
How do you make guitar sound big in your mixes?
I don't know. It just how it sounds. It's hard. I guess it's a balance thing, how it's balanced, how you perceive the guitars and how it blends with the bass. Because sometimes, I think it's a good balance. It has to be a good balance between the bass and the guitars. So if you get that right, the guitars always sound big.
How was Margarita Monet's vocal recorded for Prophecy album by Age of Paradise?
So on Margarita, I used 2 different mics on her. So depending on the song, so I would either use the AKG C24, just one side of it, and I ran it through a Neve preamp and then through an 1176, or I used SM7 if she was really belting it out, because she sounds good on both. So it depended on which song it was that I used. But those are the two mics I went between. But she sounds really good on both, and it was between those two mics. And then I would change the compression for the background vocals. So on the background vocals, then I would change the compression on her, and I would add a Dolby. I have a Dolby A card that was modified. It's the same one that kind of Mutt Lange had and used on Def Leppard. So I got the same guy to mod. I have 3 Dolby A cards that are modded, and they give it a really interesting sound on the backgrounds. So that's on it with a Fairchild compressor for the background.
What tips can you give on setting vocals in a metal mix when there are a lot of vocal layers?
Well, again, to me, it's just a balance in frequencies. When you get it all right, everything just sits correctly. So, and again, every mix is different depending on the frequencies, the key, the tempo. So it's hard to do because it's not the same for where they sit and how they're EQ'd, and depends on who's recorded it, where it's come from, if I've recorded it or somebody else has recorded it. But again, to me, it's just a balance. It's like if you get everything sitting right, the vocals are going to sit well too.
Thank you so much, Mr. Plotnikoff, for this wonderful interview. And thank you so much for all of your music work, because all of your mixes sound phenomenal. And you are a role model for many sound engineers like me out there. And thank you so much for everything you do for audio community.
Oh, thank you. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate you wanting to do an interview with me. So I hope I gave you what you need. If there's anything else you need, I'm free. So don't be afraid to ask me more questions. So